people that are learning to ride need those tight single whirl horses that are right between their eyes, because those horses are calm, they stay the course. They're the kind to learn on. Again, all of this is being said, we're assuming that there's no man-made tragedies in their life. Whirls around their mouth. Around their mouth and jaw, they're usually really hard mouth. They're usually just really iron jawed. They'll hold the bit funny. They'll hold their mouth funny. They're the kind of horses that tend, like in race horses, you'll see race horses that stick their tongue out when they run. Those usually have a bunch of whirls around their bottom lip and around their underside of their jaw. If they've got double whirls, on either side under their jaw, those horses are really, really hard mouth. They don't bend much. They're the kind that go like that and just push their jaw against you when you pull on them. Single whirls, usually they're just hard to the one side or to the other. So those are mouth whirls. And where I'm at right there, I'll pause again to say something. I know you Hancock lovers, you guys love your Hancocks. I don't have anything against a Hancock horse. But in the quarter horse world, the whirls on the underlip, bottom side of the jaw, you mostly see them in Hancock horses. Hancocks, Driftwoods, Blue Valentines, that's where you see most of those horses nowadays with a whirl under their jaw, or alongside their jaw, alongside their lip. And I don't care how much you love your Hancock, they're notorious for being hard mouth. Maybe yours isn't, Karen. I get it. They're not all that way. And maybe yours does have whirls, and he's still not hard mouth. That's because you're a great horse trainer. But those three breeds of horses are notorious for being hard mouth. And in the quarter horse world, that's where you see those particular whirls the most. Another thing I'll say about the quarter horse world is, well, let me rephrase that, the quarter horse world. In the Western cow events, so the roping, and I guess reining is not a cow event, but the roping, the reining, the cow horse, the cutting horse, you see very few whirls at all. You see them mostly on the face, and that's about it. You don't see a lot of freakishly strange whirls anywhere else. A few on the pole, where we'll talk about here in a second, but you don't see these really strange ones. And this is my theory, is that in the roping, the reining, the cow horse, and the cutting, those trainers in that discipline will flunk a horse that fast. That if this sucker's no good, we'll just flunk him. Get one that is. And I think we have bred a lot of these whirls, a lot of these negative type whirls out of these horses in those specific disciplines. In the quarter horse world, where I've seen the most whirls and the most weird kind of strange whirls are in the Western Pleasure and in the Western Pleasure. Those Western Pleasure trainers are a whole different breed of trainer, and my hat's off to you guys. If they've got one that on paper says this horse is going to make it and going to be a champion, those guys and gals, they're going to make that son of a gun win. They will stay out later. They will try harder. They will train harder. They'll do more push-ups. They'll drink more Red Bulls. They'll take more Adderall. Those trainers will make that horse be what his papers say he's going to be. A cutting horse trainer, I don't care if it's bimetallic cat and out of an own daughter of something, Royal Blue Boone. If that sucker doesn't want to work a cow, that cutting horse trainer will be like, yeah, whatever, get me another one. In those other disciplines, Western Pleasure is the one that I know the best in this specific case. They'll just keep trying, and they'll make those horses, and so they haven't bred some of these weird things out. Halter was the other one. Halter, you see a lot of these weird, freakish whirls, and some of these ones I'll talk about them where you're like, man, I've never even seen one like that. You'll see it in the halter. You'll see it in the Western Pleasure. You'll see it in some of the warm bloods, because all of those trainers are not as fast to flunk them as a cutter or a cow horse guy or a roper or a reiner. And so I think there's a little bit of part of it. But like I said about the Hancocks, in the Western world, that's where you see those whorls on the jaws and on the cheeks, which is what I'm going to talk about next. The cheek whorls. This is just something. This was in my notes about stuff old guys told me. It was I can't think of his last name. Doesn't matter. Those whorls on the cheeks, I was always told those are bad luck. Just bad luck. None of those old guys ever told me what that means or whatever, but they always told me it was bad luck. And it seems like those kind of horses, I've never had any luck with one that had big whorls on their cheeks. They just don't turn out. We had pause there. We ran out of card, so we're starting again. The whorls on the ears, you'll almost always, I've only ever seen them on mules. And I pay a lot of attention to my horse's ears. You almost only see them on mules. Evidently, they're on horses sometimes. Mule people have their whole different whorlology. They've got a whole different thing, and they're really in tune to where the whorls are on their ears. The way I understand it from mule people is the higher those whorls are, the more sensitive that mule is to sound, versus the lower they are, the less sensitive they are to sound. In so much as to say, coon hunters don't like whorls high up on their ears, because in the end you shoot the coon and you've got hounds barking, and so you don't want one that's real sensitive to sound. But evidently on horses, from talking to people, horses with whorls on their ears are more sensitive to sound. I've never seen one. Whorls on the side of the head here, that little soft spot they've got. I don't know that we actually call that the temple, but it's a similar spot to our temple. That tends to indicate the side of the brain they use, left brain or right brain. And we know that horses are left-brained or right-brained, and it works very similar to the way we're left-brained or right-brained, and it crosses from that side of the brain to the opposing eye. And left-brained horses are more artistic, which is not to say that they like music and long walks on the beach. And yeah, actually that's not true. Paint painted us a Picasso the other day, but he pooped it. But anyway, no, that it's just that the right-minded, left-minded horses are more ABC. Left-minded, right-minded. Anyway, I've confused myself here, but they go. It tends to show us what side of the brain they want to think out of, and that also shows us, for instance, which lead they'll prefer, which is usually the opposite of which side of the brain. If they're left brain, they tend to be right leaded, things like that, because they'd be right eye dominant, and vice versa. So those are things we look for. Again, that's not something you see a ton of, but when you do, that's usually the case. And then I've never seen one that had a whorl on either side of the temple, but we're left to assume that would be a ambidextrous type of horse. Yeah, and so the ones that do have a whorl on the side of their brain, or the side of their head, that indicates their brain. They tend to be kind of horses that really overthink problems. They look at something and make a bigger deal out of it, but they also tend to figure them out really quick. They tend to figure puzzles out really quick. You'll also notice that the type of horse that habitually breaks himself out of his stall, figures out how to undo the snap, the horses that figure out how to untie themselves. It's not always, but a lot of times you'll find that those horses have a whorl on the side of their head there. Okay, so this is the part that I think is cool. So they'll have, a lot of them will have, and this is something that most people have never even necessarily noticed. You just, hopefully after watching this video, you'll look at this. But a lot of horses tend to have a whorl on the top of their main line there, right behind the ears. And so the closer that whorl is to the ears, if it's right directly, double one's right behind the ears, that horse is going to break at the pole real evenly and going to be just boom, break and just hang like a chandelier. Whereas if there's a whirl on one side, it's right directly behind the ear and not one on the other, they'll kind of want to hold their head like that or like that. They won't break real evenly. And then the farther back those whirls are from the ears, that's the harder it is to get them to break like a chandelier, and also they'll tend to want to break farther back. So instead of breaking directly at the atlas and the axis, they'll break at they'll break it like 3, 4, or 5, however far that goes back. And then the same goes in the middle of the neck. If that whirl is at like 6 or 7, they'll tend to want to have that more classic vaquero bridle horse look, that rooster neck where they, for my exhibit A, this is the head, my arm's the neck. My arm doesn't bend the way a neck does, but they'll have that arch in their neck where they bulge here and have that, I say classic vaquero look, kind of the more Iberian look, with those whirls farther back on the neck. And that I've found to be really, really accurate. And there again, those whirls aren't even, or if they've got them on one side or not on the other, you'll see that horse tends to be a little stiffer in that break, or breaks a little crooked on the side that is off. And this is where I wanted to show, hopefully we get a chance here, I want to show my mare and my foal. She's got those whirls way up tight against her ears, and they're real even, and she breaks really, really even. Her foal has them up tight against her ears, but they're longer and they're uneven. And you can watch her, she's 5 months old or something like that. You can actually watch her move around, and she breaks at the pole, but then arches her neck a little farther back where her dam breaks at that pole and then tends to want to drop that neck. And that foal always has her head cocked just slightly. There's only one whirl off. And so just slightly she tips it to the right or left. I can't remember off the top of my head, but when we look at those whirls, we'll talk about that. Yeah, so 2 whirls directly behind the ears. They'll break evenly at the pole. Better on one side. Yeah, and then if they don't have any whirls at all on their pole or down their neck like that, those are horses that tend to be really stiff in the neck, tend to want to just be flat necked, and if they're going to break anywhere, they break at the withers. So depending on what discipline you're doing, you may or may not, for a judge's point of view, want more or less of those whirls in different spots. There again, a Western pleasure rider, and this, I'm talking old school Western pleasure, because it's different now, but they wanted them to really break at the withers and be the peanut roller. They didn't want those whirls. Nowadays, they're looking for a little bit more frame in those Western pleasure horses, so they want whirls right behind their ears. Okay, the whirls under the throat latch. Again, you don't see these very often, and it's partially because you don't look at these very often, because what are you doing under the throat latch? That's not where you're supposed to be. But the whirls under the throat latch, those horses are always kind of tight in the throat, and so they tend to want to elevate their head to do work, rather than break like a chandelier and work like this. Those horses tend to want to elevate and work like this. They want to look down the end of their nose. They just don't break very well in the throat latch. Yeah, and if they've got throat latch whirls and no pole whirl, they don't break at all. Another one that the old guys told me, that whirls directly under the windpipe are good luck. So that is, that far down from the throat latch. If they've got whirls right there, that's good luck. That's cool. I like good luck. So the whirls right on their chest, where everything ties together, where you're just below where your breast collar goes. Just big, large ones that are even are just a normal, consistent kind of a thing. When you get into problems, if you get one big one and one small one, they'll be shorter strided on that big one. If you get one that's off, a lot of times you'll find that horse wants to paddle a little bit. I like to look for big, even ones. And another one from the old guys, the ones that have a whirl that goes from the chest and it runs all the way up the underside of their neck, all the way to the throat latch. Those old guys always said those kind of horses will always let you down. They'll never be there in a tight spot. They're the kind that'll when you got to get on quick, you come running up there to get on him. That's the one that's going to cow kick you and the bear eats you, which is obviously bad. We don't like to see those kind of whirls. And so those whirls that are on their neck, that are on the underside of their neck, that's called a wheat. That's a wheat whirl. Those big long ones, we never like those big long ones. Those are the kind of horses that let you down, don't take pressure, aren't there for you in a fix. And the ones that have those big long wheat whirls and double face whirls, any combination of those double face whirls are dangerous. Those are the kind that'll strike you. Those are the kind that don't give you any warning. Those are the kind that remember stuff and get back at you later for it. And if you don't believe that, look at a lot of the most famous rodeo bucking horses ever. They have those long wheat whirls that go all the way up their neck, and they've got one of the combinations of double or even triple whirls in their head. And there's bucking horses that are just bucking horses and they just like to buck and they're good at it and they're bred for it, just like in anything else. But like the notorious bad ones throughout history, like Miss Klamath County and stuff like that, those ones that hurt you. Throughout history, you can look, and you can go look at modern ones now. They've got that combination. Okay. So whirls on the crest. Well, we talked about whirls on the neck going down the main line, but then the crest, what I'm calling the crest, is this far below the main line. Kind of not in the middle of the neck, but just below the neck, in that cresty part where studs get cresty, or where horses that get too fat get cresty, or where draft horses tend to carry all that fat. Those horses that have big old whirls there, they're just real slow in the neck. They just turn their neck slow and they flex their neck slowly, and they don't have a lot of contortion's not the word I'm looking for. They're just not very bendy in the neck. They're pretty slow necked. The ones that have smaller whirls are faster in the neck, and their neck has a lot more bend to it. It works better. There again, that's not a whirl you see very often. It is lower than the main line on the crest there. And there again, horses that have it on one side or the other are generally going to be stiffer on the side with it than the side without it. Cameraman, I don't remember if you remember Pretty Boy, but Pretty Boy had those, and he was like riding a broomstick. And then whatever, he also, he had all kinds, he had cheek whirls, he had jaw whirls. That sucker had all kinds of bad whirls. And then his brother, whatever I called him, Tommy Boy had the same sets of combinations, and he was even worse. And so that was what this was. Those two horses we were just talking about, Pretty Boy and Tommy Boy, I'm calling these crest whirls, but they're in the neck, not up on the main line, but in the neck. The ones both of these horses we're talking about had long ones, like about this long, on both sides of their neck, and those horses, they always stay stiff as a broomstick. They never get where they can really move that neck around. Of those 2 horses, they were full brothers. One made it. He made a nice horse, but he was real unconventional. The other always sucked. But those long neck whirls, you don't see those very often, but those son of guns are always pretty stiff. And if they've got short neck whirls or just 1 or 2, they're just stiff in that spot. Yeah, and they tend to be low pressure horses too, those neck whirls. Both of those horses were not real good under pressure, under high pressure situations. Wither whirls, you don't see that very often, but the horses with wither whirls, they seem to be real dumpy in the front end. You know, all horses naturally carry 60% of their weight on their front end, and all of our training in every discipline is to try to get collection, which is getting that weight back on the hind feet. Those horses with wither whirls, it's really, really hard. They want to be dumpy on the front end. They want to be short strided in the front end. This is old guy stuff. Those old guys always said if they've got a single wither whirl, they're really spooky to that side. That's something from my notes, from my diaries when I was a kid. I haven't seen enough of those wither whirls at all, and especially not single ones, to necessarily have an opinion on that. But I would think if it was a saddle horse, that'd be a tender spot if it was on the withers, and that horse would be spooky to that side. I'm almost completely out of what? I'm almost completely out of light. Okay, I'll make it fast. Those old guys, they called that the coffin whirl if they're on the withers. They said those horses would kill you. Back whirls get sore backs, and it makes it really hard to round their back, to get them rocked back on their withers. Rock back on their withers. That doesn't make any sense. Rock back on their hind end. Some of these, like a wither whirl, big long neck whirl, a wither whirl, a whirl on their back, those are reasons why I wouldn't buy a horse. Girth whirls have a tendency to be cinch binders. You see that pretty often in these what do we call these foundation breeds. You'll see these girth whirls. Those horses tend to be cinchy, tend to be cinch binders. That's something I hate to see. Big whirls on their belly, on the side of their belly where everything comes together in their flank. Big whirls are easy keepers. Little whirls are hard keepers. That one I'm pretty much with. Like everyone I've seen, if they've got a big old loose whirl on the side of their belly there, them son of guns get fat on sunshine. The ones with the little tight ones. Oftentimes I really like the way those horses move and get around, but they're always hard to keep. Those flank whirls, ideally they should be a long one that goes from the flank all the way to the hip. It should be a big long whirl. You hardly ever see that. You hardly ever see big long even ones. But horses that do have big long tight even ones, those horses can really rock back on their hips. They're really free in the flank. They can lift their abdomen. They can round their back, liberate their front end, do all the things we want to do. But you don't see that very often. In those flank whirls, if it's not straight, if it's tipped back, that horse will tend to be weak in the hind end. And it's usually on both sides, but if it's on one side or the other, they'll usually be weak on whichever side it's tipped back. Again, you hardly ever see them tip forward, but if they are tipped forward, those are the kind of horses that will get real sore in their back. They tend to have that coccyx rotate and get to where they won't load in the trailer, and they pull back and do all kinds of stuff that we don't like. The ones with real curvy whirls in their flank, they're the weird, sensitive horses that only like 3 people and don't like anybody else, and get upset if you're wearing sunglasses, and hate Hemingway books, and they're just sensitive. to other horses and to things. Those are the ones that always have allergies and weird stuff going on. If those whorls in the flank, if they break, if they've got this much and then a break and then this much more, they're weird about that hind leg. Those will be hard to shoe on that side. And they're also tough to depart on that side. You hardly ever see whorls on the front leg, but they're always short strided in that leg, always. Back of the hind leg on their butt, you'll see whorls there. Almost always you see them even. In fact, I can't think of a time when I didn't see one even. Those horses will really drive that hind leg up under their belly and get that ass under them and get that background. That's a whirl I like to see. So any really weird whirls, that almost always means you're an outlaw. Like just in a strange spot, a place you've never seen one, on top of their tail head or something like that. I've never seen one with like a grotesque, like, oh my God, I've never seen a whirl there. Them son of guns, that's a personal observation. They always turn out bad. You can look at the direction of the whirls. Those whirls will go one way, they'll swirl one way or the other. That's another way you can tell the handedness or leadedness of the horse. If they swirl to the left, that horse wants to pick up that left lead, just wants to be left eye dominant, vice versa. And they're almost always harder to shoe in the opposite. So if that whirl swirls to the left, they'll be harder to shoe on the right-hand side. That's funny to me, but that's something. And again, all of these things, like these almost all of these can be overcome. But just look at it. Just watch the world and see how these horses work. I've got just a couple more because I'm losing light. Okay, this was just some stuff that I learned doing a little research. The facial whorls are almost always no more than 1.5 centimeters from the olfactory lobes. So the olfactory lobes that are under the skin, under the bone, inside their head, wherever that facial lobe is, whether it's doubles or triples or up or down or whatever, it's almost never more than 1.5 centimeters away from that olfactory lobe. Okay, why does that mean anything? The olfactory lobes play a big part in the social interaction because they sense pheromones and develop at the same time from the same embryonic tissue as the hair. And the position of the olfactory lobes could play a role in disposition. So horses learn about other horses and about their environment and things like that from their olfactory lobes, which then takes all that information and sends it to the brain. And it's really, really close, 1.5 centimeters from those whorls almost all the time. So that's just a little bit of stuff I found in research that's kind of some evidence to go, yeah, this isn't all quite wives' tales and witchcraft. It is something I think is definitely worth thinking about. So there's whirlology. Y'all tell me what you think about it.